We're live and I'm very happy to be here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our panel this afternoon on edible food recovery for more equitable and sustainable local food systems. My name is Ned Spang. I'm an associate professor of food science and technology at the University of California, Davis. As a researcher and educator, I focus my work on the topic of food and the environment, and with special emphasis on the challenge of food loss and waste. I'm also proud to be a board member of the Yolo Food Bank, where I can work on opportunities to increase the recovery of surplus food to improve food security in the region. I'm really excited to moderate the discussion this afternoon with excellent panelists on the topic of edible food recovery, and would like to take a moment to provide some brief introductions to the panel. So first up, we have Zane Hatfield, Director of Programs at Yolo Food Bank. Zane has been with the food bank for 5 years and manages a team of 7 staff members that coordinate a range of food bank programs in Yolo County. They collectively reach out to senior citizens, K through 12 students, and everyone in between. Most of these programs heavily rely on edible food recovery efforts, and he works with a number of community nonprofits to engage in recovery efforts with retail partners. I'm sure we'll hear more about these programs throughout our discussion today. Thank you for joining us, Zane. Next up, we have Shea Robinson. She's the sustainability coordinator for Nugget Markets. In this role, she works to reduce Nugget Markets' waste, water, and energy consumption, oversees their food recovery program, and provides general education to their associates and guests about the importance of sustainability. She actively participates in the Nuggets food recovery efforts, helping to ensure that every department, bakery, deli, meat, dairy, frozen produce, and grocery, are sending edible food donations rather than composting. And last but not least, we have Cassie Olefson, the manager of stakeholder engagement at the Food Recovery Network. The Food Recovery Network is a national nonprofit that unites 4,000 college students, dining providers, food suppliers, and local businesses in the fight against climate change and hunger by recovering perishable food that would otherwise go to waste and donating it to local nonprofits. She has worked with the Food Recovery Network for 3 years, and her role is primarily focused on building relationships with potential and current funders of the organization, as well as other key partners and stakeholders. I would also like to highlight that the Food Recovery Network is a very strong chapter at UC Davis that has been active since 2013 and has recovered nearly 100,000 pounds of food to date. So thank you for that, Cassie. Before we get started with the panel discussion, I believe Zane has a video clip he'd like to share, so I'll turn it over to Zane for the video.
Thanks, Ned. We're actually going to start with a sneak preview. This is a video that Yolo Food Bank has been working to put together, and it's still under edit, but our audience here is going to get to see it before it is completed. So it is a sneak preview, but we're going to get started here.
Pretty much everybody's running at full speed constantly from the time they clock in to the time they clock out. We stay focused on our mission, and that's really what drives us. Good morning. Yeah.
So now that we're all here, let's get started. I'm very proud of you. We've been in this building 2 years.
We're all in this together. Any kind of struggles that I might go through, at least half of them or more are shared by everybody in the entire organization. So that's really helpful to know that every day that I clock in, I'm going to be doing a service to the community with other good people who are also as committed. Hey, good morning, Carrie. How's it going?
Isaiah, nice to see you. It's
Good to
good.
see
Thanks
you.
for asking. How are you doing?
Very well, very well.
Good. How's your wife doing?
She's doing amazing.
Exciting. Baby on the way?
2 weeks left.
2 weeks. How exciting. That's awesome.
We're very excited.
Well, I've printed out your paperwork. I've got some cantaloupes on a pallet for you and
Awesome.
some other produce. I can show you the way.
Let's do it.
Come on over.
Thanks again, Carrie. See you soon.
See you soon.
What it comes down to is no matter how many pounds of food we have in our warehouse, on the floor, in the refrigerators, or how much donations we get, the most difficult and prominent issue is getting it out into the community. Hey, how's it going? I'm Isaiah with the Yolo Food Bank.
I'm Jason, the director of the pantry.
Nice to meet you, Jason.
Do you know Chancellor's actually here today?
I didn't. That's
here.
awesome.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, good. I'm Isaiah, driver for the Yolo Food Bank.
Hi, Isaiah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Chancellor.
Why don't we go outside and check the pallets?
That sounds awesome.
Can I give you guys a hand?
Absolutely, that'd be lovely.
Okay, let's do it.
Thank you.
All right. So Isaiah, you been busy today?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It's my second stop, but there's plenty more to go.
Well, good. You know, we really appreciate this partnership with Yolo Food Bank.
Oh, we absolutely appreciate you guys too.
Food insecurity is a big issue here on campus. That's something we're trying to eliminate completely.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. You know, anything that we can do, we're here to help you guys. All of us collaborating together, working together, is part of the magic of our mission, you know?
Yeah, well, we appreciate you very much.
Absolutely.
Now you're here.
Well, it's great to meet you, Jason.
Yeah.
And it was great to meet you, Chancellor.
Thanks, Isaiah.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Have a great one.
You too.
Hello, Isaiah.
Hey, how you doing, Jim?
I'm well. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well myself. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. A lot of stops today.
Oh, I lost count.
I think we're ready to load you. So
Awesome.
if you're ready, just open up your truck there and we'll start forking it in for you.
Sounds like a plan. I'll go get set up.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
You got
Awesome. Well, thank you very much,
it.
Jim.
Thank you, thank you.
It's always a pleasure seeing you.
Yeah.
The people that I see there are there constantly whenever I come, and they're always super thankful and super gracious for us. That way they don't have to waste food. And having a connection where you're dealing with the same people, it's quite a bond, you know? Hey, Ann, how's it going?
Hey Isaiah, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are
Been
you?
a while. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yes, it has. Well, I'm glad to see you guys working back here.
Yeah, thanks. The volunteers and I have been making bags for distributions. So
Awesome. That's actually what I came here for, so I'm supposed to pick up 2 bins. Are these the ones?
These are the ones right here.
Awesome.
Ready to go.
Perfect. Well, I'll go ahead and get my jack, get them ready to go
Sounds
so I can
great.
load them up.
Perfect.
All right, thank you,
Take
Ann.
care.
You too. Hey, how's it going? No, it's gonna be a long time today, working a lot of overtime. I got over 1 million pounds up in here, so I'll try to get with you as soon as I can though. Inventory is a tremendous task. There's 5, 6 pallets, a lot of times stacked on top of each other. To go through the whole warehouse and make sure everything's accounted for is important because we need to know how much food we're putting out there. It helps when we're trying to write requests for grant money, and it also helps for people who want to donate understand exactly how tremendous of an operation this really is.
Isaiah, we got to change in plans. West Sacramento has more people than we thought. I've got some food staged over there. Can you get your truck unloaded and get it on over there?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I know it's a pain, but sorry. Thank you.
worries.
You're wonderful.
Thank you. I'll get right to it.
It's good to
Hey,
see you
Jen.
this morning. Thank
Good
you
to
so
see
much for
you.
coming out here. Yeah, we were running really low on product for our clients today. What'd you bring for us?
Right here, I got a bread bin, and then I've got some produce, some eggs, some milk. You know the
Awesome,
drill.
awesome, awesome. Let's bring it on over here.
Right on.
Isaiah, thank you so much for coming out and helping us today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for calling us.
We'll get this going and I'll let you know where to put the rest of the stuff. Thank you so
Perfect.
much. You saved us.
Thanks, Isaiah. We're all ready. You can come right over here. How's it going?
It's going really good. Keeping busy, you know.
How's your wife?
She's doing really good. Thank
Yeah?
you for asking.
This produce looks really nice.
Yeah, it's fresh. We got it yesterday.
Thanks for bringing it.
Absolutely.
Hey, you had a long day today.
Yeah.
One of those days, huh? I'll lock up.
Definitely.
Don't worry about it.
Okay,
Just
thank
go
you.
home and be with Casey and the kids. And
I will. Thank you.
have a nice day. Thank you for all your hard work again.
Absolutely.
All
Well, I
right, well-
appreciate you, Corky.
Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.
Good night.
Night.
Well, thanks for that, Zane. That was such a great video, and I hadn't seen it yet, and I'm just so impressed how well that sort of captures the story of edible food recovery through the people that are really on the front lines, all the different partnerships, you know, evidenced by that video, and all the people and coordination it takes to make this happen. So thanks for sharing that. So just before we jump into the conversation, I just wanted to set the stage a little bit with a few kind of facts and figures about food loss and waste and food recovery that I think might be helpful. So studies have shown that about 40% of all food produced in the US is lost or wasted at some point along the food supply chain. And this represents tremendous losses of water, energy, and other resource inputs used to grow and move this food all the way to and store this food for consumers. And this represents, you know, more than 200 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases, and it comes at a cost of more than $400 million per year. So this is a huge challenge. No matter how you measure it, this is a huge challenge. Meanwhile, we continue to face significant challenges in food security in the country. In 2019, it was estimated about 35 million people did not have adequate access to nutritious food. And this estimate is expected to climb to 50 million in 2020 when the numbers come in. Part of this as a result of the COVID pandemic, of course. So clearly there is a need, an imperative to find opportunities to redirect surplus food to those in need wherever possible. California, meanwhile, has sought to address this challenge with Senate Bill 1383. SB 1383 represents the first piece of state legislation that mandates edible food recovery, targeting 20% recovery by 2025 in every jurisdiction. And so we'll talk a bit more about this legislation as well. So the need is there. The policy landscape is set to facilitate some meaningful progress. So let's take advantage of our time together this afternoon to discuss how we can actually make this happen. So the first topic I wanted to touch on with you guys, considering the name of our panel discussion this afternoon, is really, I just want to think a little bit about defining some of these terms. So I want to define edible food recovery. What does that actually mean? And what does it mean for sustainable edible food recovery and equitable food recovery? So I think I'll turn it over to you guys. You can pick a term in that sentence that you want to work on defining in your with your experience, and I think that will help advance the discussion a little bit.
Well, thanks, Ned. I'd be happy to start on edible. When working at a food bank, we deal with edible food, and what we find a lot of the times is that food isn't edible. And so what that looks like for us at a food bank is it's something that if you would eat it, if an individual could eat it, and if it's been safely handled and packaged and transported and cared for, and it, if it, some people might have to meet certain dietary restrictions, but that's how what we would define as edible. Unfortunately, the food landscape in the United States is there's a lot of things that are listed as food, but really have no nutritional qualities that a human being would like. Or would be good for, though they may be tasty. A lot of those items probably shouldn't be qualified as food. So edible is something that actually from my perspective, it's something that adds nutrients to your body and is actually good for you.
That's an important piece, right? It's not every calorie is the same, and that there's different value here in having access to things like fresh produce relative to some other, sweets and desserts. Obviously, there's very big differences there in terms of how much one or the other helps food insecurity. So thanks for pointing that out.
I'm happy to jump in here. Thanks so much for the video, Zane, and adding your thoughts there. I was going to add, just kind of showing in the video as well, just demonstrated all different types of food. Like there was produce that they were grabbing. They were grabbing folks from all across the food service industry. So with us here at Food Recovery Network, we also work across the food supply chain. A lot of our work has been based in the college campuses and working with college students like folks and students at UC Davis to recover surplus food from the dining halls. But we've really seen a shift with the pandemic and a lot of college campus closing with the pandemic. So we have started to work up the food supply chain and working on farms as well and gleaning surplus produce all across the US. And so I think Zane really demonstrated well of like what it means to be edible, and then all on top of that being nutritious. And then within that, here at Food Recovery Network, since we work on a national scale, we work to prioritize our programming in specific areas of the greatest need. Can I tap into that next piece of equity that we'll be talking about a little bit today, and centering communities where there is the most surplus amount of food, as well as the most amount of folks experiencing hunger across the US. And so that's something that we here at Food Recovery Network has started to institute nationwide, and prioritizing particular areas with over 20% of food insecurity in specific states or communities across the US as well.
And
Great, thank you, Cassie. Go ahead,
I'll jump in now. Zane, that video was awesome. I mean, I knew from being your partner a little bit about what you do, but I'm so glad that video is being presented because you really do get to see the full scope of everything you deal with. And Isaiah is awesome. I would love to meet him one day. So yeah, in terms of food, I loved how you described it as the nutrition aspect. And I would say in my role, that's something I've really focused on in my intro. That's why I really touch on all the different departments, because it might be the easiest for us to donate our bakery and other like cakes and pies and things, but it's the produce and the fresh dairy and fresh meat deli and all these other items that our community members might not have access to in the same quantity, but is still the kind of needs that need to be met and that they need access to. And then Cassie, I loved how you started going down that equity route too. Because when we talk about food waste, we know it exists all along the food system and pretty much in each category of that food system, whether it's the production or the harvest or the retail side. Since my world is the retail side, I definitely see the abundance of what we have to be selling in terms of giving our consumers the access of quantity, but that does create this problem of waste, right? And so really stepping into understanding what our community demographics look like. Unfortunately, all the stores where we're located, our food insecurity is anywhere between 15 and 20%. So it's a huge need, and that has increased, of course, during COVID. And so we're really passionate and really interested in staking our claim in this edible food recovery process and making sure that if we are part of the system that's producing all of this food, then making sure that it's going to the people who need it.
That's great. Thank you, Shea. And just a few notes too. I'm just thinking about some of this terminology, and the terminology does matter. I appreciated the way Zane, defined edible in terms of just the nutritional quantity as well. So it's not not going to make you sick, but it really, how healthy is it going to make you? Those are all questions that we can ask under edible food. And the other term I want to think about here a little bit is food waste. And I use food losses and food waste to describe different parts of the food supply chain where food is not going to its intended consumer. However, there's other folks that have suggested changing that terminology as well. So instead of food waste, think about it as wasted food or surplus food, because oftentimes it's very, very high quality. And if we think about food waste, that doesn't sound like high quality. That sounds like something in a dumpster or a garbage bin. But when it's a perfect bundle of leeks or a cantaloupe or the melons that we saw in that video, it's just as high quality as something that would be purchased in a store. There's just too much of it at maybe the wrong place, the wrong time, and so we have to find another outlet. The other word I just want to talk about quickly too is recovery, because when we think about food loss and waste in general, we generally think about 3 bins of solutions. So one is prevention, just trying to have less of this surplus food that we have to suddenly find a destination for. Recovery, so when we have this situation that we're making sure it goes to those in need, it's still going back into the food supply chain. It's maybe just not being sold at retail levels, it's being donated or sold at a discount. And then finally, we have recycling, which is, if there's really no outlet, maybe perhaps at this point it is inedible, where we choose to compost it or put it in an anaerobic digester to make biogas and eventually soil amendment as well. So there's lots of different solutions. And just to be clear, we are talking about the recovery piece today, which is really trying to redirect surplus or wasted food to those in need. Shea, I was wondering if you wanted to comment a little bit more as well on just the term of sustainability, which we hear all the time. And oftentimes I'll sometimes ask my students, well, what does sustainability mean to you? And they really have to sit and think about it, even though we all use it almost every day or see it in the news. So I was wondering if you could comment on that as the sustainability coordinator for the Nugget markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with what you were just discussing about the definition of waste. At Nugget markets, I've really tried to turn that phrase and just talk about resources, because everything is recyclable. It's just whether there's a market for it. Right now we're talking about food, but the entire recycling landscape, it's the same thing. And so I think that's a way we can help our associates and our guests and all of us better understand these are all resources and what can I do to use this again, right? And the reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce is the first one, but reuse is a really important aspect. And I think those first two words have gotten lost with our excitement around recycling. So in terms of sustainability at Nugget markets, sustainability is a really long word. It's a really complex word, has a ton of different meanings depending on what context. It's hard to even say for associates who have never really dealt with it before. So I tried to give them the word or the phrase C, sustainability. So looking at the social, economic, and environmental pillars. Everyone knows what the word C means, so I can literally get them to look at our program and talk about it that way. So just, giving them more tangible, bite-sized pieces of sustainability. But it does make it, it gives them the why. It gives them a way to engage with me. It lowers the bar of entry, so to speak. So when we're in our deli, for instance, and we really put a lot of emphasis on why we want our compost to be clean, no plastics, no contamination, it helps to explain it to them. Well, this is actually going to be turned into a compost or a fertilizer that goes back to our farms, and then it goes into the plants that people eat. So that's why this is important, that a glove or some type of plastic doesn't get in there, because we don't want to eat toxins. So it is personal to them, or to their kids. And so it's just sort of bringing that home to them. So basically just deconstructing that word sustainability and trying to give them a way for them to access it and have it mean something to them personally.
That's great. I appreciate that. And yeah, so often the case is just kind of turning it into, taking this big thing and making it bite-sized and understandable. And something that people have experienced is such an important piece of the puzzle for sure. So thank you guys for that. I think we've done a pretty good job here of defining the title of our talk. And so I think we can now dig in even more to some of the key components. And, I mentioned Senate Bill 1383 at the beginning of this discussion, and, it is an interesting opportunity. I mean, this is a very different and sort of a strong policy approach to this, something we haven't really seen before. And of course, SB 1383 is a larger piece of legislation that's seeking to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Within that, we're trying to divert organic waste from landfills, so that's a component of it. And then further down the line, we're also trying to make sure that we recover 20% of edible food. And it's created some challenges in the state. First of all, we don't know how much edible food we're throwing into the landfill versus just food in general. So we've even had to rethink of how we're measuring these things. And this is some of the challenge of implementing a new and novel policy is some of these metrics. But I wanted to think about, from your guys' perspectives as stakeholders in the state that are directly affected by this legislation, what is your perspective on this legislation? How are you guys starting to position yourselves for 2025 and meeting this mandate?
I'd be happy to start on there.
Great.
As long as that there is a distribution side of SB 1383 that helps with actually getting the food to people, it is entirely in line with Yolo Food Bank's mission of feeding people. That is the highest goal that we have, is providing food for people. And so what we're trying to do is position ourselves as a great resource for the jurisdictions within Yolo County to take advantage of and to use us. We have the relationships with the vendors, we have the infrastructure, we have the specialty of this kind of work. And as long as that includes the distribution to people, then we're totally involved. But if SB 1383 is just diverting it from landfill, but we don't care where it goes after that, that's a problem with us, because we certainly think feeding people is more important than composting or feeding livestock, especially when, as Shea said, we have a number of Nugget market stores in our service area, and we do have high food insecurity. In all three of the large towns in Yolo County, there's a lot of food insecurity, and we're aiming to reduce that. And SB 1383 could be the absolute best way to do that if we engage in the right way and if the jurisdictions engage in the right way.
If I may, since Zane
Yes.
kicked us off, we feel so grateful to the Yolo Food Bank and to Zane in particular. I wish I had a Zane and all of our food agencies, just because of everything we've seen from the video to the little bit that Zane has shared, how far they go to make sure that food is recaptured and to make sure that someone is eating it. Yes, compost is awesome. Yes, animal production and feeding animals is great, but we have hunger, and those are the people in our communities that we really care about. And so that's who we really need to feed. So if we've got these numbers, almost the same percentage of food waste as people who are food hungry, like, it just seems like there should be a linear, direct relationship. And so I think really relying on the food bank, such as Yolo Food Bank, for SB 1383 is going to be really crucial. But as Zane said, they got to have the right funding to be able to do that, especially during COVID, and we've been faced with all these labor shortages. But Yolo Food Bank is set up in a really great way, because they do have more staff than other of these smaller agencies. Nugget Markets has 17 locations across Northern California and are in and around Sacramento Valley. And many of the agencies we work with are pretty tiny and are almost entirely volunteer run. And it's usually retired elderly people who are those volunteers. So it's important to have people like Zane or Isaiah that we saw in the video, who are like fit enough to be able to handle this massive amount of food, to do those long hours, and be able to adequately respond to the need of all of these businesses like ours that have the food to give. So that funding piece, I think, is really important, and I wanted to throw that out there for this discussion.
Yeah, that really speaks to me a lot, Shea, because we at Food Recovery Network, we're kind of the connecting piece. Similar to Zane, we're a resource for folks, and we're working with our what we do is we're working with the students, and the students then identify the community partners that can accept the surplus food, wherever they're recovering it from, farmers markets, farms, on campus, local restaurants, etc. And being able to be that connector piece. But similarly, a lot of our organizations are very small and maybe don't have the infrastructure. And our students have to work to identify the organizations that do, but the organizations that are smaller may be in those communities that have the most need. And so I think that particular piece of the legislation is really interesting, and excited to see how it continues to roll out. And something that we've been testing at FRN a little bit is exploring into things like community fridges. Like, can you work with partners to put a fridge outside, maybe if as the like actual infrastructure to be able to route that surplus food to communities, and having it be like many different avenues to be able to route that food. But I think overall, us at Food Recovery Network, we've been contacted by a couple of folks for the SB 1383 requirement of how can we be a resource not only at the higher education institutional level to be able to route surplus food, and then also on top of that, engaging their students in these topics and raising awareness and working with the next generation to create tangible solutions in addressing it, but also at city levels and at just even local kind of restaurants and grocery stores like Nugget markets as well, to be able to connecting them with the community partners that have the infrastructure to then be able to take it to community partners in need.
That was great. Thank you guys all for your perspectives on this. And this is something I often think about, and when I think about surplus food on the one hand, and then food insecurity on the other, my brain and most people automatically are like, well, let's just put those two things together and it will solve the problem. But the challenge is it does take a lot to connect A to B. I mean, we saw in the video, the requirement of all those logistics, it takes dedicated people, it takes trucks, it takes storage, it takes inventory management, it takes volunteers to spread this out, especially to rural communities that are harder to reach. So as much as we want to just connect the dots, it's complicated. In fact, it's not very much less complicated than our existing food system, right? I mean, it's challenging. And every piece of food, especially the more nutritious pieces are, there's a time limit. They are perishable. And so we have to move this stuff in the right way. There's potential food safety issues. So folks like Zane, Yolo Food Bank, Food Recovery Network, I think people need to realize if they feel, for example, stuck because of this legislation's coming down the line, I've never participated in something like this, where do I start? There is this existing infrastructure. And I would say that the infrastructure is twofold. One, the physical infrastructure, trucks, warehouses, cold storage, but then the human infrastructure, which is so important, building those relationships to make sure that these transactions can happen, that everyone trusts each other, that when they say a truck's going to come, the truck's going to come. So all these pieces really have to come into play. And I think what I want to emphasize is not to take that for granted, that, try to establish these partnerships, realize who you can work with, and that this edible food recovery, it's so important, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. So I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on that a little bit. And it really, this panel really does represent many of those pieces of the puzzle, the people who are donating, the people who can really deliver this stuff at scale, but also Cassie's group that can really mobilize this volunteer army to help put the pieces together, which is really fantastic. And actually, I did want to ask you, Cassie, mobilizing that army, how do you guys do that? How do you get the students going? How do you kind of nudge them in the direction to get them to recover 100,000 pounds of food? It's so amazing.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So just a couple of stats to throw out to folks to understand what our kind of reach is. So as I mentioned, we work on a national scale. So currently we have 181 chapters across the US in 46 states and DC. And we have been in existence for about 10 years now, since 2011. And we originally started, I'm based just outside of DC, and we originally started at the University of Maryland 10 years ago. And so since then we've recovered just over 5 million pounds of food. And so to your question, Ned, of how do you get students to be able to do that. We're really been asking the question ourselves recently as we enter our 10-year anniversary. And to be honest, a lot of it has been word of mouth and just kind of natural growth as students are coming to more awareness around sustainability, around climate change, but also increased food insecurity rates and looking to provide tangible solutions to the needs of their community. And I will say we have students come at all different angles. That's one of my favorite questions for our students of like, where are you coming from and why are you interested in this work? And it can be from anywhere like their major and they somehow got a connection to a class to maybe if they have knowing that a lot of college students actually do experience food insecurity, maybe they have a personal connection to it through themselves or their family. I've also heard students where they kind of start from this like more environmental, wanting to like provide an immediate solution to these huge problems of climate change. And as Ned shared in the beginning, these giant numbers of food waste. And once they get into the work, they're really starting to be exposed more to the community need and seeing directly how much food insecurity is in their community and even on their campuses. And so there's a lot of passion, of course, wrapped up in our movement and with our students. And so that definitely plays a big role. And we have some really awesome dedicated students at the ground level being able to mobilize their peers. And I will say this is also, we've seen ups and downs throughout, of course, the 10 years, but even just in the last year in itself, knowing that so many college campuses have closed down in the last year, we've really shifted our model to expand beyond just like physically recovering food. About 25 to 50, it ended up in the beginning of the year being about 25% and then jumped to about 50% of our chapters in the last year were able to recover surplus food safely on their campuses and in their communities. So for the remaining 75, 50%, we started engaging them through other topics or other ways like discussing topics around sustainability and food insecurity and racial equity and how all these topics are intertwined to be able to educate our students, to educate others and mobilize them to be able to support the overarching movement. And so they can not only know kind of in a direct action of being able to set up a food recovery program. As you said, Ned, it takes time and effort to be able to do so, but they're learning through this process that it is doable and that there's a way to do so. And then also having that kind of overarching knowledge of like, what are these large issues and then how they can play an individual role in it. And so we just work to support our students at the, us as the national team to support our students on the national level and connecting them with one another and brainstorming solutions to problems. Something also that's been really helpful for us is having a student and alumni advisory board that directly reports into our national office. And so they're able to provide their perspective. I personally work with them directly. And so it's great to hear their perspective on questions that we're asking as a national team that aren't necessarily as close to the experiences that our students currently have. And so that perspective also has been really helpful to kind of navigate this especially within a COVID virtual environment, navigating the balance. I'm sure you've seen it, Ned, as a professor of like navigating the kind of overwhelmedness for how much virtual time that we have versus being able to still like get them excited and engaged within food recovery and knowing that they have a solution that they can work on. And so that's been really helpful, especially in this last year as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for that reflection, Cassie. I really appreciate it. And you mentioned the kind of passion behind it, and I have seen it directly, you know, with our students that have participated in the program. It's completely infectious when they talk about the work and how proud they are to kind of track the pounds recovered. And I think it's the benefit of your work is so important. And I think it's really twofold. I mean, there is the actual transaction of food from one place to another that's helping someone in need. And that's, of course, incredibly important, but there's a huge educational role you guys are playing. All of these students participating in this get to take this recovery mindset out into the world wherever they land. And that's hugely important for kind of building a broader movement across the nation and perhaps even internationally when some folks return to home countries. So I thank you for that. I think that part is so hugely important to really move things forward in the coming years and even decades. And it actually reminds me too of another activity I've engaged with, which Zane, the farmers market that you guys have set up in the elementary schools. I went with our food tech club in the food science department to go participate in one of those. And again, that educational component is so huge. Meanwhile, these kids are getting fresh produce. They get to buy produce with their little tickets that they're given. It's such an amazing experience. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that program and how you guys set that up.
Yeah, definitely. So we operate in Yolo County a program called Kids Farmers Market, where we are in, usually it's K-5 schools, but we have experimented with some middle schools. But we provide essentially what is a free farmers market, and we provide local produce. Oftentimes it's organic from some of our local vendors and farmers in Yolo County. And we set up nutrition education opportunities for the kids, and we'll either do like taste testing or some other things to get them involved. And it's kind of around the idea that everything that a food bank does isn't necessarily to provide food for a whole family to eat for a week. We're not a grocery store replacement organization, but what we're doing in some of these programs like that is providing education opportunities so that it can be preventative for food insecurity in the future, or preventative for negative health outcomes in the future. In most of the United States, we're not food insecurity doesn't necessarily mean somebody's starving. They're getting the wrong calories. So they're not learning to proper nutrition or how to eat correctly. And so we use the Kids Farmers Market as a platform for that, to get into the classrooms of young children and to have them learn about these different fruits and vegetables that are available to them. Maybe have them experiment and try some new things that maybe their family might not be familiar with. Yolo County is a pretty diverse county. We have sizable Mandarin speaking populations, Russian speaking populations, Spanish speaking populations. And a lot of those groups, they eat different foods. And so we get the opportunity to really cross-pollinate all of those communities, and so that folks can relate to different foods differently. And we take that experience for those kids, and we hope that by providing that experience and providing not only the free food so that the parents can then go home and cook it for their kids, and then hopefully the kids start asking for those types of things more often, but we hope that those experiences lead those kids to live healthier lives later on down the line. Just by doing an intervention at a young age and involving produce and healthier eatings.
If I may, I just wanted to jump in and pick up on something, the vibe of what Cassie and what Zane were both talking about, which is taking the passion of the people that they work with and inspiring them to create more change in their community versus allowing us all to fall into this black hole of the problem is so big. What could we possibly do? How does it matter? So even, Cassie, as you were saying, even if you have students who are like all about the environmental side, like we're going to tackle climate change right now, and they start to understand the social side and go, oh crap, like now what, but you keep taking that energy and you say, no, these are all the things we can do together as a community, and these are the ways we can create positive change. You get kids excited about vegetables and different things that they've never seen before. They take that excitement home to their parents. So I think that passion and excitement is really important to keep stimulating these conversations, and the hope that we can make some change, because otherwise we're just going to be paralyzed and stop trying to try.
So yeah, I appreciate that perspective. And I do think, with something like climate change, where it's so big and there's these long time lags, it's just kind of hard to wrap your head around it. And so when you have the opportunity, and as these students have, of actually holding the piece of food or the crate of food or moving the pallet of food from a place you knew it wasn't going to feed someone to somewhere where it will, it's tangible. You can actually sort of feel that and see it. And I think that is so powerful. And again, especially when we can engage students in this kind of activity that they can take with them wherever they go, that's really wonderful. I wanted to take a question from the chat. Actually, this is a pretty interesting one, which is how, we often talk in terms of food recovery, in terms of pounds of food rescued or tons of food rescue. And they're saying, well, how does the pounds of food align with what we were talking about before, the nutritious qualities of food? So do you guys have other metrics you use to try to capture the nutritional aspects of the flow of food that's being recovered and not just the weight?
I'm happy to start off here. At Food Recovery Network, with all of our student chapters, we have our students report on their food recoveries each time. And so we ask a number of different questions, including, of course, the pounds of food, but also the types of food as well, just to see what is going in to the community that they're serving, as well as, of course, with food safety, the temperature that is taken at and things like that. But we try to then be able to build a graph of like how much of our food is in each category within the essentially the food pyramid, and seeing like where we are having our impact. And I will say one of our largest asks from our partners that we work with that are similar to the food bank and other partners that I'm sure they work with, we survey them each year and we ask them how we can best support them. And typically the first ask, kind of going back to the SB 1383, is funding, just being able to support their operations and their infrastructure. And then the second most biggest ask is having more access to fresh produce and more highly nutritious food to be able to serve their clients as well. So we've worked to expand our gleaning work. I know that was a question that came in, and expanding opportunities for fresh produce as well, to not only engage that part of the food supply chain, but also to be able to serve our partners too.
Cassie, can you just expand for a moment on that gleaning point?
Sure.
Like what is gleaning for those who don't know, and how did you set up that program? What does it look like?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So gleaning, for folks that don't know, gleaning is the act of recovering surplus food from farms or farmers markets. So this is typically like fresh produce. And then of course, routing that to community partners serving individuals experiencing hunger. And so at FRN, as I mentioned, we started to work up the food supply chain really during COVID a lot. A lot of our chapters, even before the pandemic, had started engaging in gleaning programs. I know the UC Davis works with, I think, a local farmers market. And we also have this pretty epic program at Utah State University where they work with residents actually that have trees, fruit trees, and different orchards and things like that on their properties to glean that surplus food. But really in this last year, we began a partnership with the Farmlink project, if folks are familiar with them. They're also a student-led organization, and they were born out of the pandemic and looking at the disruptions that a lot of farmers saw. There was a New York Times article that came out at the start of the pandemic talking about farmers didn't have buyers for more than half of their products. And so looking to address that immediate need, combined with the immediate need of folks experiencing food insecurity. And so we partnered with them to engage our students, again, especially for the folks that weren't able to do in-person food recovery safely. They have a virtual setup where you're able to call commercial farmers across the nation and connect them to surplus or to food banks that are then serving the community in need. And so through that partnership in the last year, we were able to work with Farmlink to recover 1 million pounds of produce from commercial farms across the country. And that ended up being our largest recovery year yet, thanks to the support of work with Farmlink, as well as the chapters that were able to do food recovery. And so on the national scale, that's really what we've started to tap into in the last year and are continuing to partner with Farmlink. And then to tap into what I was mentioning at the start of this talk in terms of centering equity and how we're working to increase our programming in areas of the greatest need. We identified a partner project and started working with the EPA in Atlanta to work on the more localized level, getting super local. The Farmlink scale is like very large, giant commercial farms that can have hundreds of thousands of pounds of produce. But what about the smaller local farms that maybe have a couple hundred pounds or a couple thousand pounds of produce, and being able to support them? And so in the last year, we've run 3 exclusive gleaning strategies in partnership with the EPA and the Atlanta Mayor's Office to work with our students also at Georgia State to be able to route surplus produce from these smaller local farms. And we're still running those pilots, but one of the biggest successes that we've seen, and similarly how Farmlink does their model, is they actually pay the farmers for the surplus produce and pay them to transport the food to a community partner. And so we did this at the localized level of paying a local farmer and and then routing it to, particularly kind of back to our point earlier, of these smaller organizations that have maybe are in the areas of the greatest need, but maybe don't necessarily have the infrastructure. And so being able to distribute it so they maybe have a smaller quantity to be able to take that, and also supporting them. We've also used some of the funds to be able to support those community partners and like giving them the infrastructure that they need to be able to serve the communities of the greatest need throughout the city. And so that's been a really exciting, interesting project that we hope to continue and hope to actually scale out to California and Irvine in the coming year as well, to just be able to see how we can route the fresh surplus produce while also addressing the need of food access in particular communities experiencing the most amount of food insecurity, and then also being able to support farmers in the process that have the surplus produce so they can have another market to be able to route their surplus produce.
That's great, Cassie. Thanks for that. It sounds very exciting, and I look forward to learning more about that as you expand your program. And Zane, this makes me think of, program at Yolo Food Bank. I know you guys, with your focus on nutrition, have worked with generous donors such as Nugget Markets, of course, but also gone straight to the farm. Can you speak a little bit about your programs dealing directly with growers?
Yeah, definitely. So for those of you who may not be from Yolo County or familiar with it, we're a heavy agricultural county just west of Sacramento. And we have some of the best farming land in Northern California, including the Capay Valley, which is like an organics hub for Northern California. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, we identified a need that, as a food bank, we're doing really well at rescuing from the retailers, but with all these farms around us, we're not getting traction with a lot of them. So we started a program called Yolo Grown, and it's currently staffed by one of my staff named Aaliyah Moreno, and she basically works with local farmers to either glean their fields once they've already done their harvest, or works with seed companies to donate seeds to the food bank. We then find a plot of land with a farmer. We supply the seeds for free. The farmer just has to use their empty field in water, and we're able to then grow that. And then we send volunteers out to harvest the field. And so it's a really great way to have a kind of a closed circuit of produce just within Yolo Food Bank. Especially with local produce, because we do have a ton of farmland and a ton of really great farmers that are really supportive of our work. And the big thing is a lot of the times is that if they don't have the if the farmers don't have the funding to pay the folks to harvest the field or the market to then sell the produce at, the easiest thing for them to do is just till it under and use it as organic compost essentially in their fields. Which, it makes sense because it benefits the field. But if you've just spent several months growing this piece of item for human consumption, and then you just have to go throw it in the dirt, it's a pretty demoralizing fact. So we came up with a creative solution so that farmers can call upon us. We can schedule things out. I think in July we started scheduling harvests for December and for November. So we're really looking forward, especially since seasonal produce is so big. I know it's not quite as big as maybe on the East Coast or up north, but in California, you can't grow things year round all the time. So we do see a lot less produce poundage coming in at Yolo Food Bank over the winter time. So we've tried to work with our growers, work with our seed companies to identify things that we can grow in winter so that we can maintain at least produce distributions throughout the winter as well, when we know that things get vastly more expensive as they're being trucked in, usually from the south of the United States or from Mexico or from other places like that. So we try to keep that closed circuit and maintain those relationships with those farmers, because we give them an easy way that they just spent all season growing this item. Well, we're going to make sure that that gets into somebody's household, that they're able to use it and cook it and feed their families.
Yeah, Zane, I appreciate that comment, because we talked earlier about how this stuff doesn't happen automatically, right? And growers do experience shifts in the marketplace, and are sometimes stuck with a field of perfectly good produce, but that doesn't mean they should bear all the costs of trying to get that recovered. And so that's where the partnerships can come in handy. Even for some crops, I think the cost of harvesting is equal to the cost of growing. And so that's expensive to just go get that lettuce in the field and not necessarily plow it under. So if the food bank can supply the harvesters and the truck, that defrays a lot of the additional costs for the grower. And I didn't know you guys actually went all the way to seeds. So there's another piece that you can contribute to that relationship. And I think that's a perfect example of, you know, the partnership model working really well, where everyone's sort of sharing the costs a little bit to try to make this connection happen. So thanks for sharing that.
If I could, one last thing on that too, it's really
Sure.
quite interesting because there are a lot of seed companies, and I think that a lot of the times people don't necessarily recognize that they're part of the ag community as well. So there are a ton of seed companies in Yolo County, and they'll do trial fields with the different models of the produce that they're trying to do. And once they're grown and they have their field day where they're essentially trying to sell their seed to a farmer, and once that's over, what they do is that they typically would plow those under as well. So we've even worked with the seed companies to go and harvest their trial fields to make sure that every last piece of produce that can be rescued is.
That's great. This is another really important question, actually, is someone asked in the chat, how do you discuss recovered food with individuals receiving it? Some have concerns that they are receiving expired goods. So I actually want to start on the front end of this. Shea, perhaps you could talk a little bit about, you know, expiration date labels and how that might lead to some confusion with consumers, or how you guys handle the flow of inventory based on expiration date labels and when you know to donate it, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to see a whole systemic change where we just stop using the word expired in Best Buy. They're so arbitrary. Unfortunately, the only way, just in terms of education, it's that one-on-one with my associates, where I explain, aside from infant formula, which makes total sense why that's regulated, it's totally arbitrary and based on the company. So please do like the look, smell, touch test, you know, like we all have food at home that is still good way beyond, you know, and the example I give is baking soda has an expiration date. Like, come on, it's baking soda. There's no way. So in terms of our business practices, Nugget markets, our huge branding is quality, and that quality is tied intimately to the aesthetics or the look of the produce in particular. But we pull our food way earlier than this code date because it's what our consumers expect. And so we pull early. And so this actually helps on the food recovery side because you still have at least 3, if not 7 to 10 days before the expiration date because we're pulling so early. So you are getting top quality food. We're just making sure, as Zane and Cassie have mentioned, it's highly still edible. We're making sure it's getting to you and you still have that shelf life, because ultimately what we want is when you come into our stores, you're not hitting that expiration date when you pick it up. We know it's going to be on your shelf for a little bit or in your fridge. And so our guests who pick up the food at a food bank are getting the same kind of care or attention to that. But yeah, in terms of widespread knowledge, it's really like those one-on-ones. I don't know if Zane, you've had any more luck with widespread communication about that, but.
Yeah, I can jump into that too. It's similar to what Shea says, is a lot of it, you know, I wish they would have taught this stuff in home ec. I wish, because, you know, when it comes to food dating in the United States, it's just like, whose line is it anyways, where the points are made up or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's all made up. And so it's really challenging because people have a really intimate relationship with their food. And so if they see, you know, if they see something and it's on the day of, and they don't have any other education or no one's told them that, hey, this stuff is all made up, they get absolutely nervous about it, and it totally makes sense. So what we've done, you know, and food banks across the United States have developed education and outreach materials. We train our volunteers on food dating as well. So if there's any issues at a distribution point, a volunteer should be able to say, oh, well, actually, let me tell you a little bit about this type of product. We have resources on hand at every one of our distribution sites and at our facility. But it is a challenge when it comes to the end user, because there's vastly more end users than there are staff at Yolo Food Bank. And so being able to correct those misunderstandings has been a challenge. But as Shea said, is the best way is the taste, smell, touch test. That is the best way to understand what the lifespan of an item is, rather than a date that is printed on it.
What also makes it difficult, and I know we were going to talk about this later, is we have a partnership with Feeding America, and Feeding America is one of the largest organizations regionally, but they, all of their food safety guidelines are tied to these code dates. And so, and the reason, part of the reason, if I can speak for them, that they do that is because they know that their consumer won't eat it if it's past the code date. So they're trying to play that or walk that line as well, but it still adds to the problem when even this like very large organization that's really trying to ensure food is getting to those in need is also using that as a line for food safety, even though it's, quality of food.
Yeah, and this one ties back into, the general, I just feel like consumers don't have a great understanding of the complexity of the food supply chain. I'd rather drink milk that's been refrigerated, but is 2 days past its expiration date, but been refrigerated its entire time, than one that's 2 days before its expiration date, but the truck was left out in the sun for a day. That really doesn't tell you much about how that piece of food has been handled, except just a timeline. And that's really only one dimension of all the things we have to think about with food and food safety. So I appreciate your guys' feedback on that. Cassie, did you have anything to add on the food date?
No, I think they covered it well. Yeah.
Okay, great. There was one other question before I move on. Zane, I think this goes back to you, is do you guys have any measurable goals when you have reached out to your kids' farmers market? Are you guys tracking, progress on that, or kind of, do you guys take advantage of that opportunity to educate the kids past delivering the food to them and that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. So we actually have a collaborative grant with International Rescue Committee to provide nutrition education through our kids farmers market throughout Yolo County. And so we've been doing a lot of research and surveys and tracking that data. The thing is, it's been really challenging the past 2 years because kids haven't been in school. So we haven't offered a traditional program up until really this semester. Because the last 2 years with COVID and remote learning is that we've really transitioned it more to a drive-through distribution just to get foods to those families, rather than with that we've had to focus less on the nutrition education, because I can only imagine how the parents had to deal with not only virtual learning with your kid at home, but then also all these extra handouts that the food bank is trying to get your kid to do on top of their schoolwork. So unfortunately, the last 2 years we haven't been able to do a lot of that, but we do pre-surveys and post-surveys on the semester, tracking the children's consumption of fruits and vegetables, how they've used the fruits and vegetables that we've provided for them, and kind of knowledge benchmarks on what they've learned about nutrition education. So that is part of the program. We just haven't been able to do much of it over the last 2 years.
That makes sense. And I am glad you guys are doing surveys. It's nice to know how some of those efforts might be evaluated and improved upon, or even understanding the impact. But I would also say there's probably going to be a hard way to measure the long-term impact, which is how these kids, turn into adults down the line and how they interface with food for the rest of their lives. And perhaps you guys have kind of persuaded them to think a little differently about how they handle their food into the future. Listen, you guys have done a great job so far. I want to take a brief break just to, have everyone be able to take sort of a mental and physical break if they need it, including our audience. It's 2:03 right now. I think it might be a good idea just to take a break till 2:10, and we'll all connect back then if that works for everyone. But I do want to thank everyone so far for great comments and great questions from the audience. And we'll look forward to picking this up at 2:10. Thanks, everybody. Welcome back. We'll continue the discussion here with Zane, Cassie, and Shea. This has been, I've learned a ton from you guys. Thanks for, sharing all your examples of how your organizations are working on this topic. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time in this next hour or so talking about broadly, the challenges and opportunities ahead. So we have some good examples of what we've done so far. And as we discussed before, SB 1383 and other policies like it that are surely going to be enacted elsewhere across the country are going to keep pushing us in this direction. So, what gets you excited? What are you worried about? How does this look moving forward? And I actually might start with a specific question to Zane. As jurisdictions have been sort of, and all the waste generators have been kind of concerned about how to do this, has everyone been knocking on your door? Has there been a rush of people saying, hey, Yolo Food Bank, come help us do this?
So it's been a mix and match. There has been some of that, and then some of the conversations have been mostly between the jurisdiction and the tier 1 generators, which are your grocery stores and your retailers. You know, we have existing relationships with a number of them, including through Feeding America, but also just our historic stance of, you know, we've been in Yolo County for 51 years. So we've worked with these stores, you know, since some of their inceptions. And so we have had some folks come to us and ask us, you know, try to really understand. But even that is, you know, the current food that we're even rescuing is probably just the tip of the iceberg of what it looks like in the entire county. You know, I think as you had mentioned earlier, Ned, we don't really know how much edible food waste there is being generated at any level. And so what is edible is also a highly independent way of thinking about it from, you know, from whether it's Shea's associates who are choosing, well, yeah, this is edible, but some other associates might say no. So there's been a hard way to understand about how much of this there is, but we have had conversations for, you know, really the last 4 years with jurisdictions going back to when the law was first passed in 2016. Really going, you know, what kind of a resource can we be in this? How can we help this? And how can we make sure that people get fed in Yolo County?
That's great. And, you know, I was kind of thinking, I was thinking about this a little bit earlier today, and I, you know, used, there's a great resource online for anyone who's interested called the Refed Insights Engine, which is a lot of data on food loss and waste. And I was just looking up, you know, how much surplus food is there? And it's 81 million tons of surplus food is their measurement in the US. And then I looked up, well, how much is currently being donated? And it's roughly 2.8 million tons, which is about 3.5% of the total surplus food. Now, certainly all 81 million tons are not edible, but certainly more than 3.5% is edible. So somewhere in between there is the target we should be aiming for as a nation. And that represents quite a bit of food. So I'm wondering, Shea, perhaps from your perspective, you know, you've been working with Nugget for a while, you see what's being recovered. You know, is there another sort of, is there a lot more room for Nugget markets to recover more? Or have you guys sort of, you know, built out all the recovery? What's the next, you know, the next food product you think you can recover that was hard before? Are there some opportunities you're seeing on the floor?
Yeah, all of the above. So we've been donating food for decades, but we really strengthened our food recovery program in 2019, where we, you know, wrote guidelines. We identified that not all stores were donating from all food categories, all departments to the same extent. Having those conversations at all levels, so with our store managers, but also the departmental managers and our associates about what counts as edible. As I mentioned earlier, quality is super important. So a lot of our associates are way more conservative than they need to be, and we're composting more edible food than they should be donating it. But they don't like that gray area. They want to say, give me the line and I will donate what you tell me to, you know, but when it comes to produce, it's really subjective. Is it 1 bruise or 2 bruises on an apple? You know, is it, you know, where you can fully indent the cantaloupe, or is it, you know, it's like all these things, and it's empowering our associates to say, hey, you work with this product every day. You know, if you would take it home and eat it, or if you would say, no, I'm not comfortable with that. We also say, you know, sometimes use the example of like, would you give it to your grandma? Like, do you still want to like be proud of it, you know? But most of what was going in the compost, we were like, we would all eat. It's just that we were following these protocols. So yeah, it's getting them comfortable with that. In every department, it's going to look a little bit differently. COVID did put a stressor on it because it went a lot more towards it being fully packaged and having a sealed barrier. So, you know, our bread from bakery that we bake in house is open. People like to see the bread. They like to see the color of it. They like to squish it through the paper. So that's technically a category that is pretty difficult because our bread is famous. People love the bread, but it doesn't have a preservative. So it really only lasts that day. That's why we bake it fresh every day. So it's, you know, at its peak quality. And it's in that sleeve. And so it's not acceptable. So that is totally like compost and animal consumption right now. things that like go out on our hot bar or like the buffet style, that's a missing category because there isn't total alignment in terms of food safety and public health protocols, in terms of how long we would need to keep it hot, and then can you then eat it past that 4-hour window? How would you transport it hot? How soon are people eating it? Not every agency is picking it up and delivering it to people consuming it within that hour. In fact, most agencies are preparing it for the next day or next couple days. So that's still a big category. And then I would say the other big one is, again, our meat department. We have a lot of fresh meat in the case, which what our departments do a really good job of is, let's say it's something that has gone out in the case but then hasn't sold, then we can repurpose that into sausages or ground beef. So it does get that extended shelf life. Bananas and produce can go to the coffee bar for smoothies. So there is that movement within the store. So if it's not getting sold the first time, it's going to get sold in another form. But then at that point, once we've remade it into a ground beef patty and that hasn't sold, we've already extended the shelf life. So we don't then want to give it to someone and worry about that going bad. So there is a ton of gray area in that. So I will say, like, we've tapped the low hanging fruit, the easy stuff to donate. This stuff that's hard, there is no question. And then we're really trying to stretch into like our produce right now. We're doing a phase 2 where we had donated everything that had a barcode, so packaged salads, things like that. But anything that was a weighed item, we had to figure out a way to be able to track it for our internal purposes. So that wasn't being donated. So that's like another wave. And again, training our associates to be comfortable with letting that stuff go into donations. So that's like our next wave. But then that final piece would be like that hot food and that bread. Those things we haven't really figured out yet. Again, I think Casey and Zane can probably speak more on those aspects of what they're seeing from their side as well.
Well, thanks so much, Shea, for giving us that level of detail, because it's really interesting to me that, you could probably say today we are donating 100% of our recoverable food, because it depends on where that recoverable line is in that gray area. But if you shift the line, then that opens up more opportunities to actually recover more food. So I'm hoping that's a takeaway from this discussion, is that there is, that there's some negotiation here, and there's some education opportunities for people to understand, where we want to make sure it's high quality. We want to make sure, of course, that it's safe, but maybe there are opportunities to kind of stretch our understanding of what really is still edible and recoverable, and can also make it through that next, perhaps shorter supply chain from the market to the food bank or whatever outlet we decided to send it through. So thank you for that. But it also sounds like you guys are doing a lot of work at Nugget, trying to define this and track it and come up with systems to improve recovery. I'm wondering, and I understand, grocery markets is notoriously competitive space, right? But I'm wondering if some of this is sort of pre-competitive, like if Nugget's learning some really good lessons about recovery, are there opportunities for you to share that with other grocery markets? Are there forums to share this kind of pre-competitive information that kind of lifts all boats, if you will?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. As Zane had mentioned, there were conversations going on between the jurisdiction and tier 1 generators, which we count as because of the amount of food that is going out our doors. And in that conversation, we were kind of the model of what it could look like for businesses that are like, oh crap, we have to create something from scratch. Like, what does that even look like, right? Like, what do those communication channels look like? What does that space look like? How many additional resources do we need? All those things. So yeah, we were able to speak on that a little bit. And I would imagine if we did that in one phone call, that is sort of like a toolkit that could be potentially available down the road. And in this space, it's not really, sustainability is not really competitive, right? It's all about like, the more resources, the more access to education that we have, the better society we're going to make, and the more ability each of us is going to be able to arrive at this destination. So yeah, we are lucky in the sense that we've been doing this for a while and have a pretty strong program to be able to ride through this. But I would imagine that's the kind of support we can offer to those other tier 1s that are having to start now.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. And to some extent too, it's like you in many cases, you guys are sort of educating the same consumer, right? I mean, of course I go to Nugget markets, but I also go to other grocery stores as well. And so, you know, a lot of people shop in different places. So if you're kind of sharing and providing similar messaging and taking similar approaches to this, I think that really enhances all the grocery markets. And I'm glad to hear that you guys are starting to have that conversation. So I appreciate that. I did want to bring up one other topic. So, you know, Shea, you're talking about the melon that might be a little too soft, right? I want to bring this back to Zane. So let's say we move that needle even further into the gray area. Do you guys sometimes have challenges of receiving a lot of food that actually really isn't edible, and that then you sort of become you know, the waste transfer station as opposed to a recovery agency?
Yeah, that, you know, that's a kind of a problem that food banks across the country deal with. It's called donation dumping. We do have some issues with that, you know, and a lot of it is maybe the food started out with being edible, but then somewhere along the process, either an associate or the truck driver or something didn't maybe recognize what was being picked up at the time. And so what that can happen sometimes is, as a food bank, we have to, any meats we have to receive, they have to be frozen by their best by date. So by the retailers, we can't pick up defrosted meats. However, if there's some sort of meat item that's sort of snuck in a dairy box, by the time that we get it, it's already lost and we can't do anything with it. Because we can't then freeze it then because it's already been sitting out and who knows for how long. So we do have some issues with that when it comes to that. Especially Yolo County is interesting because we're at the intersection of I-80 and I-5. So there are a lot of distribution warehouses in our service area, kind of way more than normal based on our population size. And so we have these major distributors that are dealing with probably millions of pounds of food each year that they're selling. And if they don't have a good process like Nugget does, some of the times you'll have some of that food loss happen at the store level, doesn't get caught by anybody until it's being received and sorted by the food bank. And we've seen some pretty gnarly things in there. And so it does make it a bit challenging to sort through, and it just makes our process harder as soon as contamination happens as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It is kind of creates a delicate dance there. We want to capture as much as possible, but not all of a sudden create this undue burden on the food bank to dispose of massive truckloads of food either. So, you know, just another example of how this can get a little complicated. Cassie, I wanted to turn it back to you because I wanted to follow up on sort of the question to Shea, where there's, you know, this complexity leads to opportunities to share lessons learned of what worked and what didn't work. And your students are really at an interesting interface because they're working with a lot of small, you know, organizations that are donating. And so they have to sort of establish those relationships, you know, give them security and the fact that there are not going to be any challenges with food safety when they accept the food and deliver it to people. And then they're dealing with the people that are coming to get the food and, you know, educating them and making sure that they know the food is edible. And, you know, if it's a day before the expiration date, it's still okay. So you have all these students who have to learn all this information and be the liaisons and navigate these different partners. And you have the opportunity of all these students at different universities potentially being able to share information. How do you manage that? How do you make sure everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I answer it, I was going to jump off of what Zane was saying in terms of when suppliers don't necessarily have a plan in place. That's what we talk kind of to the point of your question of like with our students, like always having a plan. We recently, actually, I mentioned our student and alumni advisory board earlier. We've been hosting some events on our Instagram, just Instagram lives this week. And they had a fun event on Monday this week that they called Spill the Beans and Problem Solving During Food Recoveries. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was always have a backup plan. And we also work with not only with our students, but also with other food service providers to be able to route surplus food that they have directly to hunger fighting nonprofit partners. So we've had folks, especially at the start of the pandemic, being like, I'm supposed to shut down tomorrow. I have all of this surplus food. Where do I take it? I'm sure, Zane, you saw that a lot at the start of the pandemic. And so I think that's really the key component of being able to build those programs and be intentional about it, like Nuggets, like other retailers that are doing that now. So then, especially with SB 1383, where they're not in 2025, like, oh, I need to do those, figure it out and everything. So I think being intentional and proactive about it is really important. And then to your questions, Ned, yeah, it is a lot to coordinate and working with our students. And then also beyond that, ensuring that the folks that we are primarily in contact with, which is the leadership team, that they're able to have the knowledge that they need to then empower their whole chapter and the student volunteers that they have. And then on top of that, being able to pass down the knowledge from kind of the sets of years over years and being able to continue the chapter. And so we do a variety of different ways to be able to educate our students. Something new that we started last year and are continuing through this year is doing regular webinars. Previously, we had done one-on-one, what we called hotline calls, where we were talking with students. And at the start of the year, we asked them to definitely call us. And then anytime throughout the year, they had questions or comments or anything like that, to continue to reach out and talk with us. And that was great to be able to learn one-on-one with our students. And they still have the opportunity to do that with our team. But we found that a lot of the students were interested to learn from each other. And and we were also noticing at the national level, like maybe in California, they're having the same problem that they're having in Mississippi. And we want to be able to connect those two chapters together. And so something new that we started this year is having specific cohort calls where we're educating the students on a particular topic. Like recently we hosted one around fundraising, or we're hosting one later this month around engaging off-campus food suppliers and educating them, excuse me, educating them about food recovery. And so we're having the students on the same call together in a Zoom meeting format, so they can ask the questions that maybe another student has, or then being able to do breakout rooms and discuss different solutions and ideas. And then of course, in terms of the food safety and the tangible things that they need to know, each year we have our students go through our official chapter agreement, agreeing that they know the food safety. We link them to all of our resources, of course, that they're educating folks in this process, that they're being intentional about the work that they're doing, and that they're able to pass on to their peers within the chapter as well. But it's a bit of a balance, being able to continue that work and continue the transition each year, and making sure that all the students are feeling really supported in their program. But I would say that that peer-to-peer format has seems to work pretty well in being able to connect our students with one another, especially across chapters.
Oh, that's great. And I'm sure it'll just get better and better over time as you kind of keep collecting, it's sort of a sense of best practices, and those students really refine how to do this. But I appreciate your challenge too, that you mentioned before. You have to, or you didn't really present it as a challenge, but really is how you guys operate, is that you sort of have the older students train the younger students. But myself, having worked in a university, I appreciate we have a couple of years with these students, and then they're off doing something else. So there's a ton of turnover, and you really have to kind of keep that consistent flow of people, and make sure that you have a sequencing of how that information is passed along from one cohort to another. So I appreciate that challenge for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Something we've started in recent years is being really intentional about that early on in the spring semester. Mm-hmm. And we host a series of leadership transition calls when we know a certain student, let's say the president of the chapter, is graduating. We'll reach out to them individually and say, hey, have you thought about, we call it passing the torch. Have you thought about passing the torch onto the next student? Even in the fall time, starting to talk with them about engaging younger students in their program. So then in the beginning of the year, the younger students can get acquainted to the program. So by the end of the year, maybe they can step up into a leadership role. And then also just to the point of what a lot of us this conversation has been about is collaboration. We always talk about students like, don't hold it all yourself. It's not your responsibility to run this entire chapter on your own. Even when students start a chapter, we encourage them to have 3 to 5 friends that are able to support them in this work. And so we continually encourage that for our students to be able to lean into other folks that are interested. And I'll also add on top of that, we also ask all of our chapters to have a faculty supervisor that will help also support the longevity and the sustainability of the program too.
That's great.
Hey, Cassie.
Oh, go ahead.
What's your turnover like? I mean, generally, can you retain students for that year or multiple years, or do you? I mean, obviously, COVID has thrown a wrench in a lot of this, but or do you have to deal with students, thinking that they're interested, and then a couple months later deciding it's not for them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm not as close to the data, but I know that especially this year, we're being really intentional about tracking that. Really because to your point with COVID, we really saw a roller coaster where students really got burnt out by the end of the year, to be honest. We had done a year-long version of webinars to engage our students, as I said, and we had a lot of traction in the beginning and slowly throughout the year getting less traction, which totally makes sense. Just like an entire year on Zoom and being able to not only do your classwork and everything that they already do, but also engaging in this other format as well. And so we're being really intentional this year about navigating that burnout and making sure that we're providing more opportunities for students to engage with one another to be able to increase that retention. And I'll also say on top of that, there's been times where a chapter might fizzle out because there's not the next contact and it just doesn't work out where the student was able to find another. But then years down the line, there's another interested student that comes up and is like, hey, like, I think this was a thing a couple years ago. Like, can I start this up again? And so that's something we're oftentimes talking about and being able to support our students to help them be proactive about passing it on. But then in the case that it doesn't happen, being able to engage students down the line as well to support the program.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because we have, mini me's or sustainability specialists at each door. We call them green gurus. And the retention is hard. It's a hard labor market. I mean, always in the grocery industry, but definitely the last couple of years. And finding people who want to be leaders in this way, like you said, not get burnt out, who are good at that relationship building, retaining them long enough to pass the torch. All of those are issues that are continual issues that we have. And I'm sure, Zane, I would love to hear from you too, in terms of your staff and volunteers and how that's worked out for you.
Yeah, I mean, for us, for Yolo County, most of the food recovery is done by Yolo Food Bank, and we have paid staff. Very little of the recovery is done by any of the other food recovery organizations in Yolo County. That being said, I think according to the metrics on SB 1383 from our local jurisdictions, there's only 700,000 pounds of edible food to recover, whereas we did about 5 million last year. So there's a mismatch there. But we definitely do a lot of it, and we do have staff turnover. I know that you and me, Shea, we've talked about this hard labor market, especially for warehouse associates or store associates. But when it comes to the volunteerism, we actually, even to relate back to the gleaning, we've actually seen a lot of engagement in our gleaning operations over the last year because it's one of those safe activities that people are able to do with COVID. And so while we might have had problems sourcing volunteers in some of our other programming, when we go out to a field and we do harvests, usually that's not an issue. And so that works out really well in our favor. For that end, but we do have the same issues when it comes, because edible food recovery is so labor intensive. There's a sorting and a categorization on both the retailer side and then the recovery side, and then once it even gets into our warehouse, it's food is touched by pretty much every single one of our staff at least once before it ends up in the hands of a recipient, just because you have to transfer food back and forth all the time.
Yeah, that's all this discussion about sort of turnover is a great reminder of just the critical role of the human infrastructure in all of this. That, you can have that bright, shiny truck, but you need someone to drive it, someone to load it, someone to distribute the food. There's a lot of roles to play here. So it's super, super important. And actually I want to talk a little bit about that, a little bit more broad than, person to person working together for this food transaction. Let's talk a little bit about the partnerships piece. We've kind of touched on it. And it's just, even going back to the video, it just seems like such an important piece to move this forward, to scale this up as needed under SB 1383. What are you guys seeing on the front of partnerships? Are you just leaning more heavily on your existing partnerships? Are you actively seeking out new partnerships? What's your approach there?
I can go ahead and start with this one. So what our approach is, we're leaning into our existing partnerships. We have really, really great relationships with our vendors in Yolo County, with our retailers, with our grocery stores. And they're all kind of nervous about SB 1383, right? Implementation is coming in a month and 10 days. And a lot of them are still going, I don't know what I'm supposed to do yet. And so we're trying to be as much of a resource for those folks as possible. We are looking to use that as a platform to kind of implement a higher caliber nutrition policy, so that, as I mentioned earlier, we're at the Yolo counties at the intersection of I-5 and I-80, so we have a lot of distributors. A lot of those distributors are maybe really high-end distributors that go to like nice restaurants in Sacramento, in that area. Some of them also supply 7-Elevens or Dollar General type vendors, not to say they're bad, but they have foods usually at a different caliber than what we're likely to try and distribute out into the community. And so what we've already stopped doing is distributing candy and sugary sweetened beverages. And we're hoping that with SB 1383, we can make it really clear to these vendors that, hey, just because it is edible and you can donate it doesn't mean that we want it. And so being able to not only deepen those relationships, but have better understanding of we're not just a waste hauler. We're not just a food hauler. We're not that. Our goal is to feed people, and that's a clear distinction. And when we feed people, we want to make them better off, not worse off. And what that means is having to cut out the items that's going to give people, long-term negative health outcomes.
And Zane, just to follow up on that, when you work with a partner or you're bringing on a new partner, what do you need from that partner besides just the food itself? Like what makes that partnership work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And what we really like is routine. Essentially, as a big logistics company that focuses on feeding people, we like to have really, really clear routines of what time we should be someplace, what we're expected to receive from said partner, and understanding what their side of the equation looks like on. So if we only pick up 2 times a week, we want to know that if we're picking up on a Wednesday, we're picking up the items from Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And then if we pick up on another day, that they're not holding items necessarily for a week for us, right? Because then that's going to be pushing us on the food safety end. So having those routines, having those communications. Also, we love to show gratitude to our donors. That people don't have to do this. They don't have to work with the food bank. They can work with a million different people in the Sacramento region. They could even work with no food rescue organization and work directly with a for-profit composter. There's organizations that do that. They don't even donate any food. They sell it to a composter who then composts it and sells it. But the idea that they're working with us and they have an interest in feeding people in the Yolo County area and making sure that some of the people feeding could be their own employees, could be their own neighbors, their family. So the idea that it's a closed circle and that people are understanding that there's a routine to it and that they're a partner in fixing the problem of food insecurity in Yolo County, that's kind of what we really ask for from a partner.
And just another follow-up question. Sorry to keep hitting you, but I think it provides some color on what your partnerships look like as a whole. So we've mentioned, grocery stores like Nugget. We mentioned growers. What other partnerships do you engage in to make sure that you can collect and distribute this food?
Yeah, so definitely the nonprofit community in Yolo County is absolutely key. Without their assistance, we wouldn't be able to have the network that we have now. And so those are folks who are featured on panels, earlier today and yesterday and tomorrow as well. But like Yolo County Children's Alliance, Empower Yolo, the Pantry, which is the Associated Students at UC Davis. They have a food pantry. So all of these partners really make it possible for us because we acquire the food, we give it to them. They know their communities the best. They know how to reach them. We've worked with Russian churches in West Sacramento, where there's a large Russian and Ukrainian population, they know how to serve their community the best. You know, we're doing in the next couple of days, we're doing a couple Dia de los Muertos events as well. So working with the Hispanic communities in Yolo County, they know how to serve their communities the best. So really, without them, we're an aggregator, but we definitely need those nonprofit partners throughout Yolo County to help us in this mission.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for providing all that detail. It's really helpful for people who aren't as familiar with the kind of inner workings of the food bank. Shea, I wanted to turn it to you, and and we clearly see the partnership between Nugget and Yolo Food Bank. Do you have other partnerships related to edible food recovery, and can you speak to those?
Yeah, we probably have anywhere from like 15 to 20 different organizations we work with. In terms of our partnership with Feeding America, the way that sort of works is we work, as Zane said, as the aggregator. We work with that regional food bank. So, in Yolo County, it's Yolo Food Bank, and Placer County and El Dorado County, it's Placer Food Bank. But on the Marin side, we work with Extra Food. And each of these are like the aggregators who then know how many smaller food agencies are in their county and then can distribute the food to them, or we work directly with them. So at one of our stores, Yolo Food Bank might pick up 1 or 2 days, but then we're on the other days, we have the smaller food agencies pick up directly. So at a couple of the agencies we work with, we work with senior facilities, or we work with nonprofits dealing with homeless people, or we work with Yolo County Children's Alliance. So it's kind of across the board. But we do also work with organizations that create meals from the food we give them. So there's sort of like two main types. There's, you pick up a box and you've got all types of food that you take home to your family, or you're going to an organization who's making you a meal from the food from the store. So like they'll take that gallon of milk and turn it into pasta. They'll take the produce and turn it into a salad, and then they're being served. So two sort of models that we work with. So that's like that's the edible food recovery side. And then some of our stores also work with farmers who then will pick up produce, but they're giving it to their animals. So that's the animal consumption side.
Great. And can you round out the partnerships to also talk about whether you have partnerships for, composting, what's not going to humans or animals, as well as on the front end? I'm wondering if you've established any partnerships to help reduce kind of food surplus at Nugget. Are there programs, or is there software that you use to kind of reduce prevention, or to increase prevention on the front end?
Yeah, absolutely. So food recovery is actually the fourth step. So when we're talking about reducing overall surplus, the first one is ordering. So our departmental managers and our corporate directors are always looking at how much food we're bringing in and trying to guess and trying to sell out, right? Like, we are a business, so that's the goal, is to have all of it be sold. But consumers don't want the last one. So we also end up having enough on our shelves so that consumer has a choice. Again, we are selling this idea of abundance. But they are adjusting the PARs, as we would call it, or the ordering, so if they know that 1 week in our bakery, for instance, we had, just making up numbers, but we had 100 extra loaves of bread. They want to reduce that to 25, let's say, because there is some room there. The second step, as I mentioned before, is the sharing of the departments. So produce can give a whole bunch of food that they don't sell to our coffee and juice bar, to our bakery, to our deli. Dairy can give a lot to those other perishable departments as well. Meat repurposes a lot of its food. Even our specialty cheese department, if they don't sell Parmesan or some of their cheddars, then our kitchen can make some really awesome mac and cheeses or whatever. So there's a lot of movement of that food. There's no reason for Coffee Bar to have to buy bananas, when we can get them from the produce department, since we always need to have the yellow bananas for our guests. And then that's 1, 2. And then we get to the food recovery. So then we're donating the edible foods. And then that next step is the compost. So we've got two main types. We either have our waste hauler, who has their organic arm, who's picking it up for their compost. Or in Sacramento, we work with an organization called California Safe Soil. They're based out of McClellan Park in Sacramento, and they turn it into fertilizer. So it's, it's capturing that nutrient quality and then selling it back to farmers. It is that for-profit business that Zane is talking about, but it is closing that loop and getting it out of the landfill. And it's going back to being able to explain to our associates that why is, hey, when you do your part to make sure that this food gets composted, California Safe Soil picks it up. They sell it to farmers who then use that fertilizer to grow the plants that are then back in our stores. So then, their eyes kind of get big and they go, oh, that's so cool. You're eating this stuff again and again and again when we're recycling it in the right way. So those are all the different pieces that we're looking at.
That's great. And thank you so much for kind of working us through all those steps, because there is no silver bullet, food waste solution or edible food recovery solution. It really is sort of an all of the above approach, and really depending on the timing, the food products, the solution itself, there's just different ways to play matchmaker here and make these solutions work in harmony. And I just appreciate the way you outline that. And, Zane could speak to the same thing in terms of, sometimes they get this donation dumping and they have to then compost the food or deliver it to animal feed. So there are, tiers of different solutions here that all of you have to work with in your businesses. So I appreciate you kind of providing a little bit of detail around that. And Cassie, I'm wondering for you, for Food Recovery Network, what's the next important partnership for you? Is it getting more universities into the network? Is it, partnering with Feeding America for some big initiative? What are you guys looking forward to, expanding your impact in this space?
Yeah, definitely. And it's so great to hear from Zane and Shea of just the holisticness of all of this work. Both of you were just saying all the different partners within it, and that's exactly within our work as well. There's so many different moving pieces and logistics of sorting it out, and really just taking the people at each area within that to be able to connect it all. So I think that is something really unique and special about food recovery, which gets me excited and passionate about it. For us here at FRN, really looking forward in this next year and beyond, we are looking to scale a lot more, I would say, and bringing in more students involved in the work to be able to reach more people experiencing food insecurity across the US. And so, as I mentioned in the beginning, looking at prioritizing particular states and then communities with the most need. And so in this last year, we looked at maps of the US and using data of the EPA where there's the most amount of excess food opportunities and where we can prioritize our programming, and overlaying that with the Feeding America map of where there's the most amount of food insecurity, and then overlaying that with where there currently are FRN chapters, where there's not FRN chapters, and in these hub sites where it hits all three, where there's not an FRN chapter, there's high amounts of food insecurity, and there's high amounts of food waste opportunities to be able to recover. We're looking to prioritize getting a chapter in that area. And so that's our goal for this next year, is to increase by 20 to 30 chapters in those particular areas. And we've identified 10 states across the US that we're looking to prioritize that programming, a lot of them being kind of in the southeastern portion, but also California, New Mexico, and Pennsylvania as well. And so looking to increase our partnership. So if there's anyone on the call that knows any folks within those areas or interested to start a chapter or get more involved, we're happy to chat with you about that as well. And I also mentioned the partnership with Farmlink. And so we're looking to expand that work again within those, both on the national scale of being able to talk with farmers that have surplus produce. But in this next year, we're looking to deepen the relationship with Farmlink and particularly prioritizing again those areas of the greatest need to bring it back to the equity piece of where we prioritizing our impact. And so we're looking to work with Farmlink to begin calling farmers in those particular states that have surplus produce to be able to route it back to the communities in need. And then also looking at the smaller farms as well. Farmlink a lot of times deal with these larger commercial farms, but we want to be able to also tap into those smaller local farms to be able to support those farmers and identifying new markets and being able to make some money with the produce that they were growing and donating it to local communities. And so our work is definitely looking to scale in the coming years and are excited to work with all the many partners that help us achieve that.
Well, thanks for that. And I really appreciate the kind of landscape you laid out, how you guys are using geography and these different map layers to really identify areas of need. And I think that's such an interesting piece of this puzzle too, because we have this global supply chain of food. Yet I think when it comes to recovery, we all of a sudden really need to focus on the local community, because it's food that's sort of at the end of its shelf life. And so you want to deliver it more quickly. It doesn't have a week, on the back of a truck to go. It's really got to be delivered quickly. And so there is this geography of the collection and the distribution of this recoverable food. And I'm wondering, Zane, if you could speak to that a little bit. You talked about how our geography in Yolo County, I mean, there's an abundance of food moving through this area. So there's a lot of food to recover. How about the distribution out to the community? Because it is rather rural, it's spread out. Have you guys sort of targeted areas that perhaps there aren't partnerships right now, but you'd really like to develop partnerships to make sure you're expanding that geographic reach?
Yeah, that is a large problem in Yolo County, is the concepts of food deserts. You have these three major towns that have all of the resources in them, and then you have the rest of the county which don't have hardly any of those resources. And for example, even with West Sacramento, with a deep water shipping channel that goes all the way up into the Sacramento region, like they have a ton of production out there that all gets shipped away. Or the same thing we've seen with the Capay Valley, is that with their high-end organics, those get shipped to the Bay Area or to Los Angeles. And so what we do is we identify the amount of food that's coming out of every jurisdiction, and then the food that we're sending into every jurisdiction. And so if we did a hyper-localized thing where West Sacramento food only stayed in West Sacramento would have double the amount of food that every other community did in Yolo County. And so we do have to move that around. And so we take food from West Sacramento and we take it to the Capay Valley and Esparto. Winters, they have a Dollar General and then they have a local grocery store there, but that's about it. So we have to bring in food that's generated out of Davis and take it to Winters to make sure. Even up in the Capay Valley, some of those folks, if you're driving and you're looking to go to a grocery store, it's about a 45-minute to an hour drive to the far west part of Woodland before you hit a grocery store. And so by focusing on these rural areas without infrastructure for businesses, for nonprofits, for those types of things, we're transporting food to these areas and we're setting up regular distributions, either every week or every 2 weeks, to where we become a staple in the community so that folks know that we become a reliable source for their nutritious needs. And we've seen that be really successful in the communities of Yolo and Knights Landing. We're exploring of ways of doing weekly distributions up in Dunnigan, which is in North Yolo. They're really small communities, but they deserve every right to basic human needs as everyone else does, despite them not living in an urban area.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that, Zane. So we're coming close to the hour here. This discussion has made the time fly by because this has been so interesting. I just want to share a few takeaways, and I'd love for you guys to contribute some as well if you have something you'd like to share. But I think, what's interesting here, we talked about a few things that I just want to highlight as being so important. We talked about education, and that's education of both who's donating and how to forge those partnerships with someone who can help with distribution, educating the communities that are receiving these goods, understanding those date labels and the fact that this is high quality food and safe food. And then along with that education, and also educating your own workers, I mean, the students at Food Recovery Network and at the Yolo Food Bank, at the Nugget, to kind of look at this in a consistent way, but also to kind of ignite the passion part of this, that they should be feeling really good about all this work. It's really, and that is sort of infectious. I mean, even your video at the beginning, Zane, really highlighted that, and I thought that was rather moving. I would say the other piece is this role of partnerships is so essential. I mean, none of you guys could do this alone. It really requires the connections between these institutions that play fundamental roles to get this work done. Right here at the end, we talked about kind of the role of space, and we talked about the role of time, like where is this stuff located? We have to think about the timing of this. This is a perishable product. How do we make sure that we have the routine, as you said, Zane, to make sure that we're in the right place and time to pick this up and deliver it to the community? So, you kind of put all those things together. And I think what's interesting here, when we talked about the issue of food loss and waste and food security, this is so important, but just because it's important doesn't mean it's easy. And so I just want to thank you guys for doing all of the hard work to get it done. I mean, it really is, it's hard work. And I mean, I appreciate it. I'm sure all of the people in your networks really appreciate it. And I am hoping that with this kind of passion and education and the learning here, that this really can be scaled up to meet the really, pressing times right now, whether it's, policy driven through SB 1383, or it's just this larger movement that's clearly taking place in the nation and the world to reduce food loss and waste, to increase edible food recovery. I think you guys are all at the forefront of this, and it's going to be exciting times ahead. So I really appreciate it, but I do want to give you guys a few minutes to give a closing statement if you have something to share.
Well, I guess I'll start off. I appreciate everyone's time here. I think this was a great discussion. Cassie, Shea, Ned, thank you for moderating. My biggest takeaway is hunger is a solvable problem in this country. With the amount of edible food that gets wasted, the just sheer number that you had mentioned earlier of 80 million tons or whatever number that was, it's just ridiculous that we still have food insecurity in this country. And it's an incredibly solvable problem through these dynamic partnerships that we have with retailers, other organizations like Food Recovery Network. And I'd say for California specifically, using SB 1383, this is the greatest opportunity to make California the first state in the nation that does not have hunger as an issue, and for Yolo County to be the first county to be a food secure county. If jurisdictions really cared about their constituents, they would fully fund an SB 1383 that would get food out of the landfill and into people's homes. And that's my takeaway.
Thank you, Zane.
Yeah, I guess just to add on to that, the thing about California legislation is it always makes so much sense, but then there aren't like those next steps of how businesses and jurisdictions are supposed to follow through. So I think SB 1383 has an amazing possibility to really solve this issue. But throughout this discussion, sort of some of the problems that we've mentioned, we gotta know what those follow throughs look like so that businesses can want to follow through. Like I said earlier about we need to lower the bar of entry, make it easy to say right decision, let's make this happen, instead of pointing out all of why it's so hard to enact.
Thanks, Shea.
Yeah, and jumping off that, I really appreciated what you said, Ned, in terms of it's not easy, even though it's possible. And to your point, Shea, of being able to provide those resources and things like that. So I definitely encourage folks to tap into their local networks, to get in touch with Zane and the Yolo Food Bank, to reach out to us here at Food Recovery Network. And then within your own community, seeing what type of food recovery operations there are, because there is a lot of different resources and a lot of sharing within this network as well, being able to support one another. So I really appreciate the conversation. Glad I got to join and hear these great stories. And thank you, Ned, for being such a great moderator as well.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you guys for being excellent panelists, and thanks to the audience for asking some great questions along the way. So with that, we'll let you guys all go, and I just really appreciate this opportunity, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and week. Take care.